The moment Dami walked through the front door of that Houston penthouse, she knew something was wrong. Not wrong like a bad feeling. Wrong like a smell you can't locate. Wrong like a room that's too quiet when it should have noise. She set down the grocery bags, rice, achi, stockfish, the good kind her employer liked, and she heard it. Laughter. Not just any laughter. Her employer's laughter. Ezra Mensah, 41 years old, founder of Mensah Capital, a private equity firm worth $2.3 billion, was laughing. And Dami hadn't heard him laugh in 4 months. She stood at the kitchen entrance and listened. He was on the phone. His voice was warm, lighter than she had heard it in weeks. "You don't have to do all this, you know," he was saying. "I'm fine." A pause. "I know you are. That's the problem." And then he laughed again. Dami quietly put away the groceries and pretended she hadn't heard a thing. But she had heard everything. And if you love stories that make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, about who shows up and who disappears, then stay with me. Because what happened inside that penthouse over the next 6 weeks changed Ezra Mensah's life forever. And it started, like most things that matter, a long time before anyone realized it was starting. Ezra Mensah had built his empire from the ground up. Born in Kumasi, Ghana, the eldest son of a secondary school mathematics teacher and a market trader who sold fabrics on Thursdays and Saturdays, he had come to America at 20 with a scholarship, a suitcase, and a stubborn setness his father called a curse and his mother called a gift. By 28, he had his MBA from Wharton. By 32, his first fund. By 38, Mensah Capital was on the cover of Black Enterprise. By 40, he had acquired 3 companies, sold 2, and had more money than he would ever be able to spend. But money, as Ezra would tell you, is a very loud thing. It attracts a very specific kind of attention. He met Celestine Boateng at a charity auction in River Oaks. She was 33, stunning, in a midnight blue gown that looked designed specifically for her body, which it was. She had told the designer exactly what she wanted and exactly what she expected it to communicate. She was also a lifestyle influencer with 1.4 million followers, a wardrobe that cost more per month than most Americans made in a year, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in a room full of 200 people. She turned that smile on Ezra, and he was done. "I've heard of Mensah Capital," she said, tilting her wine glass toward him. "But nobody told me the man behind it was this interesting." "You haven't heard anything interesting yet," Ezra said. "Then I suppose you'd better fix that." They talked for 3 hours. He walked her to her car. She texted him at midnight. He called her the next morning. Within 4 months, she had a key to his penthouse. Within 8 months, they were attending galas as a couple. Within a year, his mother had flown from Kumasi to Houston to meet her, which in their family was not a small gesture. It was everything. His mother, Ezra Mensah, was a woman who wore her 68 years with dignity. She had calloused hands and sharp eyes, and she had spent 40 years reading people across market stalls and school corridors. She sat across from Celestine at dinner and studied her the way a jeweler studies a stone. Not rudely, not obviously, just carefully. Watching for things that weren't being said. Celestine was charming. She complimented the jollof rice. She laughed at the right moments. She called his mother Auntie Abina in a voice that sounded practiced. On the last night before Abina flew home, she sat with Ezra in the kitchen while Celestine slept. "She is very beautiful, my son. She is, Mama. Does she make you feel at peace?" Ezra paused. "She makes me feel excited." His mother nodded slowly. "Excitement fades. Peace stays. When the noise is gone, what is left?" She looked at him. "Tell me what she does when you are not looking." Ezra smiled. "Mama, you worry too much." A mother does not worry too much. She worries exactly as much as she should. She stood, kissed his forehead. Watch what she reaches for, Ezra, not what she says. What she reaches for when she thinks no one is looking. He walked her to the guest room and told himself his mother was from a different generation, that she didn't understand the way relationships work now. He told himself this for 6 more months. The engagement happened on a rooftop in Santorini. A private chef, Greek wine, the Aegean turning gold in the evening light. Celestine screamed when she saw the ring, an oval-cut diamond, 6.8 carats, set in platinum. She held it up against the setting sun and rotated it, studying the light it caught. She didn't look at his face, not once, but Ezra was looking at the sky and thinking about the future, so he didn't notice. The wedding was planned for September. Budget, $2.5 million. Venue, a private estate in the Texas Hill Country. Guest list, 350. Celestine had already hired a planner, a florist, a calligrapher, and a dress designer. All before Ezra had officially confirmed the date. Everything was set, until it wasn't. Ezra's company had a bad quarter. Not catastrophic. Mensah Capital had weathered far worse, but enough to make headlines. A deal collapsed in March. A portfolio company underperformed. His net worth, on paper, dropped by roughly 40%. 40% of $2.3 billion is still more than most people will see in 10 lifetimes. But the headlines were ugly, and in their world, headlines mattered. It was around that same time that Dami came to work in the penthouse. Dami C. Afolabi. Dami, to everyone who knew her, was 29 years old, from Ibadan, Nigeria, by way of Dallas, Texas. She had come to Houston the previous year, following the collapse of her marriage, which had lasted 16 months and ended with her husband revealing that he had a second family in Port Harcourt that he had forgotten to mention before the wedding. She had left with her son, Tunde, who was 3, and 2 suitcases, and the quiet, exhausted dignity of a woman who has cried everything out and come out the other side still standing. She cleaned houses and cooked for private clients through an agency. The Mensah penthouse was her 3rd placement. She worked Tuesdays through Saturdays, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. She was precise, she was quiet, and she did not make herself known unless she was needed. Ezra barely registered her presence those first weeks. She was background, furniture that moved and cooked. Celestine registered her immediately and had thoughts. Make sure she uses the service elevator, Celestine told Ezra the first week, loud enough for Dami to hear from the kitchen. And I don't want her in the master suite when I'm home. It makes me uncomfortable, Ezra said. She works for us, Celestine. She's not a threat. I didn't say she was a threat. I said it makes me uncomfortable. Dami heard this and said nothing. She used the service elevator from then on. The diagnosis came on a Thursday in April. Ezra had been having headaches for 3 months. He'd ignored them the way men ignore things they are afraid of, rescheduling the neurology appointment 4 times. When he finally went in, Dr. Osi at Houston Methodist ran an MRI and then asked him to sit down. A cavernous malformation, a cluster of abnormal blood vessels in his brain. Not cancer, not immediately life-threatening, but requiring close monitoring, lifestyle adjustment, reduced stress, and possibly surgery, depending on how it behaved over the next several months. There was a real risk of hemorrhage. There was a real risk of stroke. Ezra sat in the parking lot afterward for 40 minutes. Then he drove home. Celestine was at a brand partnership event when he called. "Baby, what's wrong? You sound weird," he told her. Silence. "Oh my God." Her voice shifted. He could hear people and music in the background. Okay, how serious is it?" "It could be serious. The doctor wants to." "Okay, listen, I can't really talk right now. Can we talk tonight? I'll be home by 11. She was home at midnight. She kissed his cheek, poured herself a glass of wine, and said, "Tell me everything." But her eyes kept sliding to her phone, and by the time he finished explaining what the doctor had said, she was scrolling. So you might need surgery, she said. Possibly. They want to monitor it first. And what does this mean for the wedding timeline? Because the venue is already booked and the deposits are non-refundable. Ezra looked at her. That's your question? I'm just thinking practically, baby. Someone has to. She fell asleep before him. He lay in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Dammy arrived the next morning at 7 as usual. She set her bag down, tied her apron, and went to start breakfast. Ezra was already up, sitting at the kitchen island with untouched coffee in front of him. She looked at him the way you look at someone when something is clearly wrong. Not prying, just noticing. Should I make something hot, sir? You haven't touched that. I'm fine. She nodded, started on breakfast. But halfway through cracking eggs, she said quietly, without turning around, my uncle had headaches for 2 years before anyone took them seriously. Third doctor finally found what it was. He's fine now. It took a while, but he's fine. Ezra looked up. I didn't tell you I had headaches. Dammy was quiet for a moment. No, sir, you didn't. She placed his breakfast in front of him, refilled his coffee, and left the kitchen without another word. He sat there and ate every bite. Over the following 3 weeks, the difference between the two women in his life became something Ezra could no longer explain away. Celestine, week 1. She suggested they hold off on telling people about the diagnosis. It'll affect how they see you. People lose confidence in leaders when they seem vulnerable. Let's wait and see what the doctors say. She also sent him an article about a wellness retreat in Sedona that cost $14,000 for 5 days and suggested it might help with stress. She had already looked up whether her influencer rate would go up if she documented the trip. Dammy, week 1, she started making different things for breakfast. Oat porridge with tiger nuts. Herbal tea she had to source from a Nigerian grocery on the other side of Houston. My grandmother swore by this for the head, she said when he raised an eyebrow. I know it's not medicine. I just thought it couldn't hurt. He drank it. He didn't know if it did anything, but it tasted like something his own grandmother might have made, and that was enough. Celestine, week 2. She told him she needed the MasterCard for the month. $62,000. When he asked what for, she said, wedding things. We're behind. He was lying in bed with a headache that had kept him from the office for 2 days. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom and asked him to transfer the money, which he did, and then she left to meet her planner, and he didn't see her again until 10 o'clock that night. Dammy, week 2. She came in on a Tuesday to find him in the living room with the blinds drawn, lying on the sofa with a cold cloth on his head. She didn't ask. She went to the kitchen, came back with ginger tea, and something dark she called her, Auntie's headache remedy. She would not say what was in it, and set it on the table beside him. You don't have to drink it if you don't want to, she said. I'll just leave it here. Then she went back to work. An hour later, he picked it up and drank it. By afternoon, the headache had loosened enough that he could sit up. She found him sitting up when she came to check, and her whole face changed. Not a performed smile, just quiet relief, the kind you can't fake. Better? She asked. A little, he said. What was in that? Dried hibiscus, ginger, few things. She paused. My son gets migraines. I've had a lot of practice. He hadn't known she had a son. How old? 3. His name is Tunde. Is he with family while you work? My neighbor watches him. She's good people. A pause. He likes dinosaurs. Only talks about dinosaurs. It gets exhausting, and then somehow it doesn't. Ezra found himself almost smiling. What's his favorite? She looked at the ceiling, pretending to think. Today, I believe it was the Pachycephalosaurus. Last week it was the Spinosaurus. He changes his loyalty often. Smart kid. Too smart, she said simply, and went back to the kitchen. Celestine, week 3. She came home from a brand trip to Miami with new luggage and a sunburn and an energy that had nothing to do with him. She sat beside him on the couch that evening, legs tucked under her, scrolling through photos from the trip to decide which ones to post. "You look good," Ezra said. She held up her phone. "Which caption?" He read them. He pointed to one. She nodded, typed, posted, and then said, "The doctor said you're stable for now, right? So the wedding's still on? That's what you want to know." She looked at him. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything." "Good, because I've been very supportive through all of this." He didn't answer. She went to bed. He sat in the dark and thought about his mother's voice. What does she reach for when she thinks no one is looking? Damie, week 3. She found a book on the kitchen counter. He had set it down after trying to read and giving up because he couldn't focus. It was a novel, something a colleague had recommended. The next morning she arrived and said, "I started that book last night. Read the first 50 pages. He blinked. "How?" "Found the same edition at the library. I looked it up after I saw it." She hesitated. "I thought maybe we could talk about it sometime, when you're feeling up to it. Reading is hard when your head is bad, but talking might be easier." He stared at her. "You went to the library." "They're free," she said simply. They talked about the book that afternoon. She sat across from him at the kitchen table on her lunch break, 30 minutes, and they talked about the characters and what they reminded them of, and whether the ending was earned. He disagreed with her reading of the main character. She held her ground. He found himself leaning forward. When she left that day, he sat for a long time in the chair she had sat in. It was a Thursday night, late, when he finally understood the full picture. Ezra couldn't sleep. He walked to the kitchen for water. Celestine was in the living room. He heard her before he saw her, on a video call with her friend Portia, voice low but not low enough. "He's been so difficult since the diagnosis," Celestine was saying. "Everything is about his health now. It's exhausting." Portia's voice. "How bad is it actually?" "The doctor says it's manageable. But here's the thing." She lowered her voice further and Ezra stopped moving. He updated his financial documents last month, asked his lawyer to review the estate plan. "If we're not married when something happens, and they said something could happen, Portia, like a hemorrhage or whatever, I walk away with nothing. We've been together 2 years. I've invested 2 years in this." "So you want to move up the wedding?" "I want to lock it in before he changes anything else. Once we're married, what's his is half mine regardless." Portia went quiet. "Celly, don't celly me. You think he's with me for my personality? We both know what this is. I look good next to him. He feels good being with me. It's an arrangement. I'm just the only one honest about it. And the health stuff? You're not worried about him?" A pause. The kind of pause that tells you everything. "I'm worried about the timeline," Celestine said. Ezra stood in the hallway for a long time after that. He walked back to the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked at his hands. 2 years. He had imagined growing old with this woman. He had imagined bringing children to Kumasi to meet his mother. He had imagined something real. He heard the front door of the guest room close as Celestine ended her call. And then he heard something else. A very soft sound from the kitchen. A cupboard. Water. He walked to the kitchen and found Dami there. She was not supposed to be there. Her hours were long over. She was in a plain coat over her work clothes, her bag on her shoulder, a container of something on the counter. She startled when she saw him. "Mr. Mensah, I'm sorry. I thought you were asleep. I came back for my transit card. I left it in my bag, and I made extra soup this afternoon. I thought I'd leave it, in case you needed something in the night." She stopped. She looked at his face. "Sir, what happened?" He sat down at the kitchen island. She sat across from him, bag still on her shoulder, coat still on, transit card still on the counter. He told her everything, not the medical details she already knew from context, not the diagnosis. He told her what he had just heard in the living room, what Celestine had said about the timeline, about the arrangement, about being the only one honest about what it was. Dami listened without interrupting. She held very still. Her hands were flat on the counter. When he finished, it was very quiet. "Dami, say something." She looked at him for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes. Why are you telling me this?" He looked at her. Really looked. "Because you're the only person in this house who has been honest with me for the past 6 weeks. You went to the library for me. You came back tonight with soup you didn't have to make. You argued with me about a book." He shook his head. "Celestine has been here 2 years, and I cannot name one thing she has done that cost her something. Not one. But you." He stopped. Started again. "You told me about your son, about your uncle, about your grandmother's tea. You gave me things out of what you had, which wasn't much, and you never once made me feel like I owed you for it." Dami was quiet. "I see you," he said. "I know that probably sounds strange from someone who barely noticed you were in the room for the first month. But I see you now." She looked away, out the window at the city lights beyond the glass. When she looked back, her eyes were bright, but her voice was steady. "When my marriage ended," she said, "thought I had nothing left. I had Tunde and 2 bags, and I didn't even have a bed frame for the first 4 months. I slept on a mattress on the floor. I thought the thing that broke me was being deceived. But actually the thing that broke me was not being seen. He didn't see me. Not once in 16 months." She paused. "I think that is the loneliest thing in the world, to be standing right in front of someone and be invisible to them." The kitchen was very quiet. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Ezra's eyes steadied. "I'm going to give Celestine exactly what she came for, a day she'll never forget." The hill country estate was perfect on the morning of the wedding. September light, golden and warm. Fields of wildflowers. 350 guests in white chairs under a canopy of string lights, champagne flutes in hand, murmuring about the florals, which had cost $48,000 and had been flown in from Colombia. Celestine was in the bridal suite, radiant. Her gown was ivory silk, hand-beaded at the bodice. Her hair was up. Her makeup was flawless. Her hands did not shake when they were photographed. She looked like a woman who had planned exactly this and arrived exactly where she intended. She had no idea that Ezra's lawyers had been in his office for the previous 2 weeks. She had no idea that his security system, which she had always assumed was for burglary, recorded audio in every common area of the penthouse. She had no idea about the conversation that existed now on a hard drive, fully transcribed, in a sealed envelope with his legal team. The doors of the estate opened. Music began. Ezra walked in, not slowly. He walked like a man who knew where he was going. He walked to the altar, and he stood there, and he waited until the room settled. Then he turned to face Thests. "Before we begin," he said, "I need to tell you something." His voice was clear, calm, the voice of a man who had spent a long time in a storm and finally come out into air. 2 years ago, I fell in love with the idea of someone. I made the mistake many of us make. I saw what was beautiful, and I stopped looking for what was true. He looked out at 350 faces. 3 weeks ago, I overheard my fiancée explain to her friend that our relationship was an arrangement, that she was with me for financial security, that once we were married, she intended to access as much of my estate as the law would allow, and that the timeline of our wedding was determined not by love, but by changes to my financial documents. Gasps moved through the crowd like a wave. I have a brain condition. Some of you know that. And when I heard what she planned to do with it, he paused. I decided she deserved a wedding day she would never forget. He looked toward the back of the room. Celestine, I know you're listening. In the bridal suite down the hallway, the live feed that Ezra's team had quietly arranged, standard for large estate weddings, was playing on a mounted screen. And Celestine, surrounded by her bridesmaids, heard every word. I have the recordings, Ezra continued. I have the transcripts. I have 2 years of evidence that what you offered me was performance, not partnership. He looked at the guests. There will be no wedding today. He turned to the back of the room where Dami sat in the last row, in a borrowed dress the color of deep amber, her son Tunde asleep against her shoulder, his small hand curled against her chest. There is a woman in this room, Ezra said, who came back to my apartment at 9 o'clock at night to leave me soup she had made on her own time, because she thought I might need something and she had not been asked. There is a woman who went to the public library on her lunch break to find a book I was reading so we could talk about it. There is a woman who gave me her grandmother's tea recipe and argued with me about fictional characters and told me about her son's favorite dinosaur. His voice changed, became something quieter, more careful. She never once treated me like an account to be managed. She treated me like a person who was hurting. And where she comes from when someone is hurting, you take care of them. It doesn't matter who they are. Dami sat very still. Tunde stirred slightly on her shoulder. She pressed her hand to his back. I'm not standing here to propose to her, Ezra said. That would not be fair, and she deserves fair more than she deserves grand. I'm standing here to say that some people spend their whole lives invisible, doing the real work, being the real thing, and nobody looks at them. He paused. I'm looking now. From the hallway came the sound of a door, then heels. Then Celestine's voice, sharp and fracturing. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You, security, stepped forward quietly. There was no scene, or rather, there was one, but the security team managed it with the smooth efficiency of people who had been briefed. The doors closed. Her voice faded. The room was silent for a long moment, and then, from the third row, one person began to clap. Then another. Then the whole room was standing. 350 people in hill country September light, and the sound rose up through the canopy and out into the wildflower fields, and probably reached all the way to the catering tent. Ezra and Dami did not rush. He would say this to anyone who asked. They did not rush. She kept her job for another month, mostly because she was practical about money, and he was careful about blurring things. They had lunch. They talked about the book, and then other books. They talked about Kumasi and Ibadan and Dallas, and what it cost to build something from nothing in a country that had not been built for you. They talked about what they believed love actually was, underneath everything. Not as a concept, but as a daily thing, a thing done with hands. Tunde eventually decided that Ezra was acceptable, which was a higher bar than most adults could clear. He informed Ezra that the Pachycephalosaurus was underrated, and Ezra, who had done 3 hours of research in preparation for this conversation, agreed and offered his own analysis. Tunde looked at him with the deep suspicion of a child who is being handled. Then he said, "You can sit with me," and moved his dinosaur figures to make space. That was the moment Ezra knew, if he had not known already. His mother, Abina, flew from Kumasi when he called to tell her. She did not say, "I told you so," she said. "Tell me about her," he told her. When he described the soup left on the counter at 9 at night, and the library book and the headache tea, his mother was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Watch what she reaches for, Ezra." You watched. Good. They married the following year, not at an estate. In the garden of a church in Kumasi, Ghana, on a Saturday morning in June, with Abena crying into a handkerchief and Tunde standing very seriously as ring-bearer, and 300 guests from 2 continents eating jollof rice and dancing until midnight. Dammy wore a gown the color of the amber dress she'd borrowed for the day in hill country. She had thought about wearing something different, but Ezra had said simply, "That is the color I saw you in when I finally looked." So she wore amber. Celestine filed a civil suit for emotional damages and was told by two separate attorneys that she had no case. She appeared briefly on a reality television show the following spring. Some lessons, as people say, are never learned. But this story was never about Celestine. This story was about a woman who took the service elevator because she was told to, and went to the library on her lunch break, and came back at 9 o'clock at night with soup she didn't have to make, and sat in the last row of someone else's wedding with her son asleep on her shoulder, asking for nothing. Those are the ones. The people doing the real thing quietly in the background, never asking to be seen. The ones who reach for you, instead of reaching for what you have. Those are always the ones.